Found. Sheriff Jetty talked about the morning he found God. Sunday morning coffee. There were only a few people left in the coffee shop. The coffee shop was a quiet corner in the back of a gas station convenience store, just a few booths and sugar shakers. It was an hour after church services, and most had their fill of Sunday best and goodwill towards all men, topping off their fuel tanks for the drive home. Back then, I was a hard drinker and a bastard. I make no lie about what I was, because what kind of man I was led me to the man I am. Some had heard Robert Jetty's story before. Some were new to it, as everyone in church was forthright to tell of every moment they were saved. Sheriff Jetty kept to himself at the back of the church, strangely silent, stoic, hesitant to stand and sing, hesitant to be much of anything but an observer to the proceedings. One man's salvation wasn't for public consumption. Others got a joy at seeing other people grasp their hands and wring their palms over one sordid story or another. Jetty kept to himself at the back of the church. Still, there were moments when he was inspired, over a day-old donut and some coffee. As long as you're glad to be the man you are right now, you can't complain one bit or feel guilty of the kind of man you were. But here I was, this bastard, this drunkard, young as any good bastard was, driving home from Sunday school. Sheriff Jetty hung his fingers out in quotation marks. That's what we called this rotten dive we went to on Saturday nights to drink ourselves into a stupor. It was mostly because, when we drove home stumbling drunk, none of us ever got into a wreck or busted or killed anyone. Call it dumb luck. Every time we drove back to the flop house after drinking, it was always past this roadside church. That was the root of why we called it Sunday school, the irony of us heathens getting second-hand good graces by driving drunk by this church. Like doing so saved us from getting what we deserved. Of course, it made sense to us, because it was consistent, and because we were drunk. This was the one morning when we didn't drive by the church. I understand the absurdity of assigning providence to simple coincidences. The church could have just as easily been a barn or a flophouse. Changes nothing, any which way the story gets told. One of my buddies raced ahead with one of the other guys, both having got new cars and were horny to see who was fastest. I didn't care, just wanting to get home in one piece. And you know damn sure that roadside church was our lucky charm, and we left it in the dust. Lucky is as lucky does, convinced of it then as most young kids are now. There I am, minding the road, and came across a cloud of dust on the side of the road. I was tired and my eyes were all fuzzy, so I didn't grasp the scatter of glass all over the road. I did smell the antifreeze and gasoline. It wasn't until I stopped and looked over the side of the road. I saw for myself. Haunts me to this day. Joe passed Brian at over 100, head on into another car. Brian couldn't stop in time and crashed right into them. I came across nothing but bent cars, twisted steel, and dead bodies. Dead bodies, but one. An infant who was in the back seat and covered in blankets. All this blood and gore and waste of life, and this one baby was saved from it all. Saved. Had to be. And I had to be saved too, because I lied like the best of them, saying I knew nothing. These two idiots flew by me, I said to everyone, and they met their end on their own. Jetty emptied his coffee cup and watched the silent faces around him. 5 people died that morning. When I saw the baby crying away, it crushed me. That morning, I walked to that church and sat down, still drunk, and prayed my first time, and never drank a drop since. You see, a miracle like that, it changes you. Glass. The last time the truck driver cried was when his father died. The driver was a young man then. Afterward, he promised himself never to shed a tear, because no one else in the world would ever be worth it. Stepping through the scattered bits of both cars, his whole body shivered, and his eyes stung, his chest agonizing over the effort to hold back tears. There's something wrong with a man who doesn't keep a promise. When he saw a woman's hand hung out an open window, motionless, he couldn't hold himself any more and broke that promise. Sheriff Jetty recognized the cars. The only reason the ambulances had to hurry was to get the road cleared off. Deputies were already blocking traffic and diverting cars. The rain had let up some. One of the deputies took the trucker's statement. The man hadn't the strength to stand, sitting on the edge of the ditch, soaked to the bone, telling what he could. Deputy Ryan was patient, standing stoic in the rain as a fireman brought the trucker a blanket. I know them. I've had coffee with them. I know the names of their kids. Only 3 bodies were pulled from the wreckage. 3? Jetty narrowed his eyes at the deputy. A young girl, a man, and woman. They had a son. Jetty looked at the bent mailbox. Did you check the house? Ryan's up there right now. There's no one answering. The deputy held up a boy's shoe. This was found in the car. So he was in the car. That's what we figure. The deputy looked back over where one of the cars were pulled off the road. Get everyone you can spare to check the ditches. See if he was thrown from the car. I'll go check the house again. Ask the trucker if he saw anyone climb out of the car. He's pretty shook up. He's strong. He'll tell you. The deputy looked at 3 fresh gouges cut into the road. The 2 cars likely slid into each other. The truck had no place to go and no time to go there. Is it possible we'll find the boy? From my experience, anything is possible. Sheriff Jetty walked around the scatter of broken glass. Such a silly waste. Such a silly accident. The war stories his grandfather told through his last few years were shocking. Fighting the Germans, in the rain and mud, in winter. The expression on his face while he told of the scores of men killed in an instant left the old man in a trance, eyes glassy and glazed. The simple way he told of the death of men had a barren honesty, as if he were the executioner himself, retelling the names of the benefactors of his daily work. After so many years on the job, Jetty understood the detachment necessary at moments like this. The man he talked to last Sunday now being collected in pieces, the woman his sister worked with in town and knew quite well, mangled and bloodied. Not for some grand cause or victims of some larger-than-life villain. Just an accident. A silly, silly accident. There were state police and other officers looking around with their flashlights for anything out of place. He looked down at one of the side mirrors from one of the wrecked cars, thrown to the edge of the driveway. In the mud, he spotted a shallow footprint. Path. Dizzy woke to blackberry vines growing from the dash of the car. The thorns reached out to him like teeth, the vine curling with a serpentine intent to coil around his tiny body and eat him. Still, while the briars reached out to consume him, they offered fruit as reward or temptation. He took a dare and plucked a berry from the closest vine. He put it to his lips and felt the sting of broken glass on his lips and in his hand. He plucked another berry from the vine and it turned into glass as well, making a tiny cut on his fingertips. The glass shined in the middle of his palm like those little squares of glass from a car window. He dropped it to the floor and plucked another, and it turned into glass. With each berry plucked from the vine, the glass cut his finger more, and the vine grew closer and bigger, from the gaps under the screw heads, from behind the gauge faces, under the heater vents, from the glove box, from the defroster under the windshield. Dizzy carefully climbed out of the car and pressed himself as close to the ground as he could. But the ground stung him, as the vines did, covered in that same broken glass that seemed to push up through the dirt. He swept the glass away so he could crawl through, but where he cleared the glass and put his knee down, the glass was there again, cutting his knees and toes, cutting his hands where he tried to brush the glass away. In tears, Dizzy looked around the vines for anything that could help him. There were a few spots where the dreary sky could be seen, but the rain still came down. Tired and hungry, Dizzy crawled back into the car and over the front seat, to the floor. He curled his arms around his bleeding knees and shivered, feeling the vine scratching over the top of the seat. As with a snake's silent crawl, the vines burst through the gaps in the metal, hanging the soft, sweet berries over Dizzy's head, tempting him with more pain. He pinched his eyes shut and pushed his face down against his knees. When the thunder returned, it shook the car. The lightning struck and sounded like gunshots, and hammers on steel. The sound filled his head, his ears in too much pain to hear anything but the vibrations through his skull. He pulled himself closer and closer, tighter and tighter, until he could feel the vines coiling around his scalp, down his back, around his arms and legs. Home. Deputy Johnson carefully carried the boy from the back of the shed. It was something he knew as a boy, an instinct that never left his memory. When something horrible happened, young Johnson always went to a safe and secure place, a secret place, the back of the old milking barn where his father couldn't find him with his big leather belt or a switch cut from the plum tree. The rain washed the little footprints away by the time Johnson reached the top of the driveway. The house sat silent and dark. He looked down at the muddy ground and saw a little fire truck half sunk in a puddle. He picked it up, wiping it off. Johnson spotted footprints leading to the shed. He passed his flashlight through the cluttered contents and followed the half-muddy, half-bloody footprints to where Dizzy huddled. The boy was bloodied and battered, a long cut down his arm, his clothes shredded from broken glass. He curled up in a ball against the back wall of the shed, behind an old car seat, behind an old box of broken tools. Johnson carefully pulled the box back and saw the blood from the boy's ears. He reached out to the boy, and Dizzy shrank back. Johnson tried drawing Dizzy out from behind the seat, holding the little fire truck out to him. He brushed it off as best he could and held it for the boy to see. "It's all right. It's fine. You're safe." Johnson put the fire truck on the ground by Dizzy's bloodied feet so he could see it. "Son, it's going to be fine. You're safe now." Dizzy's eyes focused on the toy and stared for a moment. The thunder pounded his brain, the only thing he could hear, like the sound of rushing water. Then he looked up. He saw the dim shine of the badge, then the hands held out to him. He saw a face he remembered, and saw the mouth move. All Dizzy could hear was the thunder cracking overhead. "You're safe." Johnson slowly pulled Dizzy from the corner and held him close. He wiped blood from the boy's eyes, down the side of his face, where glass had cut him. "You're safe." Dizzy trembled for a moment, then wrapped his arms around the deputy's neck and held fast, a little blue car with yellow windows clutched in his hand. "You're safe." Johnson walked out into the sunlight of a clearing blue sky.